Sonny Liston didn't begin under bright lights or roaring crowds. It started in the deep South, in a place where hope was as scarce as the crops that struggled to grow. Born into a brutal life on a sharecropping farm in Arkansas, young Sonny knew more about pain than play. His father, a harsh and unforgiving man, ruled the household with an iron fist, leaving scars on Sonny's back that never truly faded. By the time he was a teenager, Sonny had enough. His mother had moved to St. Louis, and he was determined to follow. With no money and no options, he shook pecans from his brother-in-law's tree, sold them in town, and used the earnings to buy a bus ticket to a new life. But St. Louis wasn't the fresh start he had hoped for. Without an education and with few honest ways to make money, he found himself running with the wrong crowd. Before long, he led a gang that terrorized the streets, mugging and robbing, earning him the nickname the Yellow Shirt Bandit from the local police. Inevitably, the law caught up. In 1950, Sonny was sent to Missouri State Penitentiary. But for the first time in his life, prison wasn't just another punishment, it was an opportunity. 3 meals a day, structure, and discipline were things he had never known. And then, fate stepped in. The prison's athletic director, Father Aloy Stevens, saw something in Sonny, something dangerous, something powerful. He urged him to try boxing. The moment Liston laced up the gloves, everything changed. A professional heavyweight named Thurman Wilson was brought in to test him. 2 rounds in, Wilson had seen enough. "Get me out of here," he gasped. "He's gonna kill me." That was all the proof anyone needed. Sonny Liston wasn't just another inmate. He was a force of nature. A man who had been beaten, broken, and cast aside was now on the verge of becoming something terrifying inside the ring. The world had no idea what was coming. When Sonny Liston walked out of prison on Halloween night in 1952, he wasn't just stepping into freedom, he was stepping into a new life, one that would make him both feared and famous. There was no time to waste. He had fists like wrecking balls and a hunger that couldn't be measured. Boxing was his way out, and he knew it. In less than a year, he tore through the amateur ranks like a man possessed. Even after hitting the canvas early against Julius Griffin, Sonny roared back, battering his opponent so badly that Griffin could barely stay on his feet by the final bell. That was Liston once he had you in his sights. He didn't stop until you had nothing left. His rise continued on the national stage. At the 1953 U.S. Championships, he smashed through his early opponents, but in the quarterfinals, a scrappy 17-year-old named Jimmy McCarter managed to outpoint him. It was a rare setback, but Sonny didn't forget. He later hired McCarter as a sparring partner because if you beat him, he'd make sure you paid for it every day in the gym. Then came the International Golden Gloves. Representing the United States, Sonny faced West Germany's Hermann Schriebauer, a European medalist who had built a reputation for toughness. But toughness didn't matter when Liston was in front of you. 1 round in, Schriebauer was crumpled on the canvas. It wasn't just a knockout, it was a warning to the world. By September 1953, Sonny was ready to turn pro. The problem? No one wanted to back him except men from the shadows. Organized crime figures saw something in Liston, a wrecking machine they could control. Desperate to fight, he signed on without hesitation. "Whatever you tell me to do, I'll do," he said. And just like that, Sonny Liston belonged to the underworld. His professional debut was pure destruction. 1 round was all it took for Don Smith to hit the floor. It was the first of many. At 6 feet 1 inch with a staggering 84-inch reach, Liston wasn't just big, he was built like a nightmare. His fists were the size of cannonballs, and when he let that crushing left jab fly, opponents felt like they'd been hit with a crowbar. He kept rolling through the competition. Nationally ranked Johnny Summerlin, beaten twice, both times in Summerlin's own backyard in Detroit. But in his 8th pro fight, something unexpected happened. Facing an awkward, unorthodox journeyman named Marty Marshall, Liston, maybe a little too cocky, got caught. Marshall broke Sonny's jaw in the 3rd round, yet Liston refused to quit, finishing the fight in agony. He lost the decision, but he didn't forget. When they fought again, Sonny dropped him 4 times and knocked him out. In their 3rd and final meeting, he left no doubts, dominating over 10 brutal rounds. But while Liston was carving a path of destruction inside the ring, trouble followed him outside of it. His criminal past never quite let go. The police harassed him constantly, stopping him on sight. Then, one night in 1956, it all boiled over. A cop approached Sonny near his home, and what happened next became the stuff of legend. Liston snapped, beating the officer so badly that he shattered his knee and gashed his face. He even took the cop's gun. When the newspapers got hold of the story, they painted him as something out of a horror movie, a violent monster who couldn't be controlled. He spent 6 months behind bars, and when he got out, St. Louis had turned against him. The cops made his life hell, detaining him for no reason, making it clear he wasn't welcome. And so, in 1957, Sonny Liston packed his bags and left for Philadelphia. He wasn't running, he was regrouping, and soon, the whole world would know exactly who he was. By 1958, Sonny Liston was back, and he wasn't here to play. 8 fights, 8 wins, 6 knockouts. The heavyweight division had a problem, and its name was Sonny Liston. Training under Eddie Yawitz, Liston was sharpening his skills alongside Virgil Akins, the reigning welterweight champion. But in boxing, success always had shadows. Yawitz and co-manager Bernie Glickman were dragged into a grand jury investigation tied to the mafia's grip on the sport. Soon, Liston's management shifted into even murkier waters. His new handler, Joseph Pep Barone, was just a face for the real bosses Frankie Carbo and Frank Blinky Palermo. Men who didn't ask for respect, they took it. That didn't bother Sonny. He wasn't in boxing to shake hands. In 1959, he started mowing through the division like a wrecking ball. First up, Mike DeJohn, a ranked contender with a big punch. Liston ate him alive in 6 rounds. Then came the real test, Cleveland Williams, the man with dynamite in his fists. Williams had speed, power, and a reputation as the hardest hitter in the game. But Liston? He had something better, an iron jaw and a left hand that could break bones. Williams landed big shots early, but Liston kept coming, walking through fire, and by the 3rd round, Williams was finished. Some say it was Sonny's most terrifying performance. If the heavyweight division had doubts before, they were gone now, and he wasn't done. By the end of the year, Nino Valdez and Willie Besmanoff were added to his growing list of victims. Then came 1960. 5 more fights, 5 more wins, a rematch with Cleveland Williams. Over in 2 rounds, Roy Harris, a man who had gone 13 rounds with heavyweight champ Floyd Patterson, barely survived 1 round against Liston. And then there was Zora Fali, a top contender who was supposed to be tricky. Liston bulldozed him in 3. He had left no question Sonny Liston was the most dangerous man in the division. His knockout streak ended against Eddie Mackin in September 1960. Mackin was crafty, moved well, and lasted the full 12 rounds, but he didn't win a second of that fight. Even after Liston was penalized for a low blow, he battered Mackin from bell to bell. By the end, the crowd, many of whom had never cheered for Liston, were on his side. Mackin, frustrated and desperate, had resorted to clinching and grappling so much that at one point, he nearly threw Sonny over the ropes. It didn't matter. The decision was clear: Liston was the #1 contender. But being the best wasn't enough. Floyd Patterson was the champion, but his camp wanted nothing to do with Liston. And it wasn't because they feared his punches, at least. That's not what they said. The excuse was his criminal ties. Liston's past his prison time, his run-ins with the law, his mob-backed management made him a walking controversy. The Pennsylvania Athletic Commission even suspended him in 1961 after he was arrested twice for minor offenses. But the hypocrisy was thick. Patterson's own manager, Cuz D'Amato, had his license revoked for shady dealings. But when it came to Sonny, the rules were different. Even civil rights leaders wanted him kept out of the title picture. The NAACP worried that a Liston victory would damage their movement. Some black fans viewed him as an embarrassment, a walking stereotype of brute force and criminality. When a white reporter asked why he wasn't marching for civil rights, Liston famously snapped, "I ain't got no dog-proof ass," a sharp jab at the brutality protesters were facing in the South. Even the President of the United States didn't want him to get a shot. When Patterson met with John F. Kennedy in 1962, the president urged him to steer clear of Liston. The Justice Department was watching Sonny, and they didn't like what they saw. The boxing world was split. Heavyweight legend Jack Dempsey was among those saying Liston shouldn't be allowed to fight for the title. Sonny, never one to stay silent, fired back. Where was Jack Dempsey when they needed him in World War I? He growled. Frustrated, Liston dumped his old management and started calling Patterson out in the press. If Patterson was willing to fight white contenders but not him, was he drawing a color line against his own people? That argument hit hard. Behind closed doors, Patterson wanted the fight, but D'Amato wouldn't let him take it. That battle of wills eventually led to D'Amato being pushed out of Patterson's camp. Sonny Liston had forced his way to the doorstep of boxing's greatest prize. Now, all he needed was the chance to take it. For years, Sonny Liston had been the boogeyman of the heavyweight division. The champion had ducked him. The boxing world had tried to bury him under talk of his past, his connections, and his reputation. But on September 25, 1962, there was no more hiding. The fight was set. The experts didn't believe in Sonny. The press doubted him. Former champions lined up behind Floyd Patterson, convinced that Sonny was too basic, too predictable, too slow. Sports writers called him a one-track fighter, easy to figure out. The odds favored Liston, but the heart of the boxing world? That belonged to the champion. But Sonny had spent his entire life proving people wrong. Comiskey Park, Chicago. The world heavyweight title was finally within reach. As the bell rang, Sonny didn't waste a second. He stepped forward, cutting off the ring, his eyes locked on the man who had spent years avoiding him. Patterson, fast and elusive, tried to move, tried to slip away. But Sonny didn't chase, he stalked. There was no dancing, no feeling out process. Just Liston, pressing forward with the patience of a hunter who already knew how the story would end. Patterson's plan had been to attack, get inside, land his shots, and escape before Sonny could counter. But there was no escaping Liston's reach, no breaking free from his grasp. Patterson tried to clinch, but he only managed to trap one of Sonny's arms, leaving the other free to do what it did best: destroy. Then, the moment came. A left hook, short, brutal, and final, exploded against Patterson's jaw. His legs buckled. His body crumbled. He hit the canvas, dazed, broken, unable to beat the count. It was over. 2 minutes and 6 seconds. That's all it took for Sonny Liston to end the years of doubt, the whispers, the excuses. It was the third fastest knockout in heavyweight title history, and the first time a reigning champion had been sent home in round one. The same reporters who had picked against him sat stunned. They hadn't even seen the final punch. It happened too fast, too violently. Some even suggested the fight had been fixed, that the champion couldn't have fallen so easily. But there was no mystery, no conspiracy. It was just Sonny Liston, doing exactly what he had said he would do. He was the heavyweight champion of the world. Sonny Liston had spent his entire life fighting for respect. When he knocked out the heavyweight champion in just over 2 minutes, he thought just for a moment that everything was about to change. He had a speech ready, carefully prepared words for the crowd that, surely, would be waiting for him when he returned home. But when his plane touched down in Philadelphia, there was no celebration, no parade, no sea of fans cheering his name, just a handful of reporters and PR staff. Sonny stepped off the plane, eyes scanning the empty airport. Nothing. His broad shoulders, usually squared with the confidence of a man who had beaten the odds his entire life, slumped. The excitement in his face faded, replaced by something else, something colder. He had been shut out. Philadelphia, the city he had fought under, wanted nothing to do with him. They didn't see a champion. They saw the man with a past they refused to forget. The man they had called every ugly name in the book, a fighter they had already decided didn't fit their idea of a hero. For years, Sonny had tried. He had forced smiles, tried to show kindness to reporters who never gave him a fair shake, tried to prove that there was more to him than the monster they painted him to be. But that night at the airport, something in him broke. He was done playing their game, done trying to be the champion they wanted. If they were going to call him a villain, he'd give them exactly what they expected. The press had never been kind to Sonny, but now they went after him harder than ever. They didn't see the man who had clawed his way from nothing, who had survived a brutal childhood and a prison sentence to reach the top of the boxing world. They saw only the legend they had created, the thug, the bully, the beast. One reporter even joked that instead of a ticker tape parade, Philadelphia could just throw his arrest warrants into the air like confetti. Another wrote that Sonny's victory had proven that, in a fight between good and evil, evil always wins. Sonny stopped caring what they thought. He was the heavyweight champion of the world, but he carried his title like a man who already knew it would never be enough. His troubles with the police didn't stop, and Philadelphia made it clear they didn't want him around. So Sonny packed his bags and left, heading to Denver for a fresh start. "I'd rather be a lamppost in Denver than the mayor of Philadelphia," he said. But even as he tried to move on, the shadow of doubt still hung over his reign. Some called his victory a fluke. They said he had caught the champion off guard, that maybe he got lucky. So when the rematch was set, Sonny had one goal: to prove that luck had nothing to do with it. The bell rang, and just like before, he wasted no time. One knockdown, then another, and another. The fight was over in 2 minutes and 10 seconds, just 4 seconds longer than their first meeting. Sonny Liston had destroyed the champion again. And yet, when the referee waved it off, the crowd didn't cheer. They booed. Loudly. Sonny knew what that meant. No matter how many fights he won, no matter how many challengers he sent crashing to the canvas, the public wasn't with him. But he didn't care anymore. "They'll have to swing along," he said, "until somebody comes to beat me." It was February 25th, 1964. Sonny Liston, the most feared man in boxing, stepped into the ring in Miami Beach, Florida. The heavyweight champion was a wrecking machine, his punches like sledgehammers, his presence alone enough to make most men crumble. The world expected another brutal knockout, another victim added to the growing list of men who had dared to stand in his way. The odds were 8-1 in Liston's favor. The experts scoffed at the idea of an upset. Out of 46 sports writers, 43 believed the fight wouldn't last long. Liston himself didn't even think he needed to train seriously. He had destroyed the last champion, Floyd Patterson, twice in the first round. This was just another night at the office. Even with a bad shoulder, he wasn't worried. From the opening bell, Liston went after his opponent, looking to end it fast. He stalked forward, eyes locked on the young challenger, his fists cocked like loaded weapons. But something was off. His punches weren't landing. Every time he tried to cut off the ring, the challenger slipped away. Liston had never faced anyone this fast, this elusive, this different. Then, suddenly, in the third round, the champion felt something he had never felt before: his own blood. A deep cut opened beneath his eye. His arms felt heavy. He couldn't pin this kid down. The punches coming at him were too quick, too sharp, too relentless. By the time the 6th round came, Sonny Liston, the man who made other fighters quit before the fight even started, sat on his stool, his body battered, his mind unraveling. And then the unthinkable happened. When the bell rang for the 7th round, he didn't get up. The fight was over. The world was stunned. Sonny Liston had quit. Officially, the story was that his shoulder was too damaged to continue. But whispers started immediately. Had he given up out of frustration? Had something else been at play? The questions never truly went away. Then came the rematch in 1965. It took place in a tiny town in Maine, and from the moment it started, something felt off. Less than 2 minutes into the fight, Liston hit the canvas. It didn't even look like a real punch had landed. People in the crowd didn't see anything. Even the man who threw it, the new champion, seemed confused. "Get up and fight, sucker," he yelled. But Liston stayed down. The referee, distracted and unsure, hesitated. The timekeeper had counted Liston out, but the ref never even gave an official count. Chaos erupted. Fans shouted, "Fix." Reporters scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Some believed the knockout was real, that Liston was simply beaten. Others insisted he had taken a dive. Years later, Liston would be asked what really happened. His response? "That guy was crazy. I didn't want anything to do with him." Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he wasn't. But one thing was certain: Sonny Liston, once the most feared man in boxing, never regained his throne. His time at the top had ended in mystery, in controversy, in questions that would never truly be answered. And just like that, the unbeatable man was gone. Sonny Liston was a man built like a fortress, fists like cinder blocks, and a punch that could shake the soul out of a man. He didn't need words to strike fear. His presence alone did the job. In the ring, he was a wrecking machine, breaking down opponents with crushing jabs and bone-rattling power. But just as fast as he rose to the top, the world watched him crash down just as hard. And yet, even in the twilight of his career, he wasn't done swinging. After his shocking losses to Muhammad Ali, Liston disappeared from the grand stage. People thought he was finished, but Sonny had other plans. He returned to the ring with a vengeance, knocking out everyone in sight. In 1968, after 11 straight wins, America got a reminder of the storm that was Sonny Liston when he faced Henry Clark in a nationally televised bout. Sonny didn't just win, he bulldozed Clark, stopping him in the 7th round. The old lion was back, and he wanted everyone to know it. He spoke about fighting Joe Frazier as if it were an errand he needed to run. It'd be like shooting fish in a barrel, he said. The confidence was still there, the power was still there, and for a while, it looked like Liston was climbing his way back to the top. He went on a 14-fight winning streak, knocking out 13 of those opponents, until he met Leotis Martin in December 1969. Liston controlled the fight, knocking Martin down with a left hook in the 4th. But boxing is cruel, and sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. In the 9th round, Martin landed a punch that sent Liston crashing to the canvas cold. It was a stunning moment, and just like that, the whispers of his comeback turned to doubts again. But Sonny wasn't finished. 6 months later, he stepped into the ring for what would be his last fight, facing the tough, iron-chin Chuck Wepner. Liston unleashed hell on Wepner, pounding him so badly that the fight had to be stopped after the 9th round. Wepner left the ring that night with a shattered cheekbone, a broken nose, and 72 stitches. Later, he'd admit that of all the men he fought, including Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, Sonny Liston hit the hardest. That was the last time Sonny would raise his fists in the ring. Outside of boxing, Liston's life remained a shadowy puzzle. He was a man who never spoke much, but his silence said plenty. He lived in Las Vegas, surrounded by whispers, stories of mob connections, loan sharking, and underworld dealings. Some called him a dangerous man. Others said he was just trying to survive in a world that never fully accepted him. Then, in January 1971, the story took its darkest turn. Sonny's wife, Geraldine, returned home from a trip and found an awful smell creeping through the house. In the bedroom, Sonny was slumped against the bed, lifeless. The police ruled it an overdose heroin, but something didn't add up. Sonny was terrified of needles. Friends swore he'd never touch heroin, let alone inject it. The cops found drugs in the house, but no syringes, no paraphernalia, nothing that pointed to a man using. And then there were the rumors. Some whispered about mob retribution. Others said drug dealers thought he was an informant. Some even believed he was silenced for knowing too much about a rigged fight. Even in death, Sonny Liston was an enigma. His grave marker reads only 2 words: a man. No dates, no titles, no explanations. Just that, and maybe that's fitting, because Sonny Liston was never just one thing. He was a champion, a menace, a mystery, a man whose fists made him a legend, and whose life left behind more questions than answers. To this day, his story lingers half hero, half myth, always fascinating, because Sonny Liston wasn't just a fighter. He was a storm that left its mark long after it passed. Even after his time in the ring was over, Sonny Liston refused to fade away. He was the kind of man you couldn't forget, no matter how hard the world tried. His name lived on, whispered in conversations about the hardest punchers to ever lace up gloves, his reputation growing like a legend passed down through generations. Far beyond the boxing world, Liston's presence still lingers. In 2008, a bronze statue of him was raised in Stuttgart, Germany, a testament to a fighter who, despite being cast aside in life, refused to be erased in history. His name even found its way into the world of horse racing, with champions galloping under the name Sonny Liston, as if the spirit of the old warriors still ran strong, refusing to be beaten. Even in death, Sonny Liston stood tall. He was more than a fighter, more than the myths and mysteries that surrounded him. He was a force of nature, one that could never truly be knocked out. Sonny Liston never asked for the world's approval, and he sure as hell never needed it. He fought his battles inside and outside the ring, never begging for sympathy or second chances. The world threw everything at him: poverty, prison, rejection, corruption, and he still carved his name into history with his fists. He didn't just fight men, he fought perception, fought fear, fought a system that never wanted to see him rise. And yet, here we are, still talking about him. His life ended in mystery, but his legend refuses to die. His name echoes in conversations about the hardest hitters, the most feared champions, the great what-ifs of boxing. Statues stand in his honor, racehorses sprint under his name, and his story continues to captivate those who dare to step into the shadows of boxing history. Maybe Sonny Liston never got the clean, heroic ending others did. And maybe that's the best way to remember Sonny Liston, not as a victim, not as a villain, but as something far greater. A storm that refused to be forgotten.